Hello, 8th grade, and welcome to part 2 of your historical reading skills. In part 1 on Tuesday, we went through this PowerPoint in a little bit more detail, and I discussed a few reading skills with you, one being sourcing and one being contextualizing. You were then to take these skills and the questions that could be asked of these skills and re-look at that email I sent you that seems a little fishy and answer the questions. So in this lesson, we are going to look at the following two, the last two, and you are going to do the same with the new reading skills put forth to you. So as we left off on Tuesday, we talked about contextualizing a document. Moving on, we're going to look at our third reading skill, which is a close reading. Historians can ask questions such as, what claims or assumptions does the author make? What evidence does the author use? What language, such as words, phrases, images, or symbols, does the author use to persuade the document's audience? This is going to be pivotal when you reread that email. And how does the document's language indicate the author's perspective? A lot of you talked about how the person who wrote its language and how they typed and the capital letters, that'll play into importance when you're answering these questions. By closely reading a document, students are able to identify the author's claims or assumptions about an event, evaluate the evidence and reasoning the author uses to support these claims, and evaluate author's word choices, understanding that language is usually selected to convey a specific message. Now, if you recall this email, somebody is asking me for something and it doesn't seem quite right. So you're going to be able to evaluate their word choice and see if it's legit. So think about when closely reading a document, especially this email. What claims do they make? What evidence do they use? What kind of language are they using to get your attention? And how does the document's language indicate the author's purpose? Lastly, our fourth reading skill is corroboration. This is a term you guys had with me last year in 7th grade when we were talking about corroborating or confirming stories. So say that you had an issue with a student or a teacher, right? And you want to go talk to another adult, whether it was Mrs. Conan or now Mr. Bishop or Mr. Brown, whoever it might be. And you explain that there was this situation where something happened. Well, of course, the adults are going to do their research and say, is there anybody that can back up or confirm your story? Those are synonyms for corroborate. Essentially, you are looking for someone to confirm your story. So, with corroboration, historians ask questions, what are other possible documents or sources? Is there another piece of evidence out there that can back up what this document is already telling me? What do the other documents or sources say? Do they agree? And if not, how do they differ? So do they corroborate, or is their story different from what your document is saying? And what are the most reliable documents and sources? This kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the school year last year when we talked about primary and secondary sources, but we'll get into that later. So, when you corroborate or confirm the authenticity of the document, you should be able to recognize disparities or differences between accounts, establish what is probable by comparing documents or sources to each other, meaning you're going to try and figure out what exactly is possible here and what is probably false. So again, in corroborating a document, you're going to ask these questions about the email I'm going to set forth to you. And lastly, to tie it all up, we talked about writing a historical account at the very beginning of last school year. But when developing or writing a historical account, historians use multiple sources, meaning you cannot just rely on one source to tell a story because everyone has different purposes and points of view and perspectives. Make sure that the historian questions the sources, because if we didn't check up on these sources and just took them at their word, like Wikipedia, we could have invalid information. Determine the weight of the evidence, not necessarily how much does it weigh, but what kind of credit does it give? And use the evidence to construct an account of what happened. Thinking about historians, who else uses evidence to build a case? If you said lawyer, you'd be right. Here's your judge. Here's your lawyer talking to the jury. Think Law and Order. Think any of those other criminal shows. A lawyer uses evidence to build his case to fight for his client. And that leaves you with our graphic organizer. We have our artifact, which is a material evidence from the past. We question the artifact. Who used it? Where was it used? Why was it used? How was it used? And we use our historical reading skills to determine the value of this evidence. Now I want you to go back into Canvas, and I want you to reread the email from my friend and answer the next two sets of questions.